Welcome to The Explainer. When we talk about Islam in Europe, the conversation usually jumps straight to immigration in the 20th century. But what if I told you the real story is over 1,000 years older? Today, we are digging into a history that is woven deep, and I mean deep, into the very fabric of the continent itself.
Okay, so first things first, let's just tackle the biggest misconception right out of the gate, the timeline. Because the starting point for this whole story, it's probably not where you think it is.
If you ask most people when Islam arrived in Europe, they'd probably say, sometime in the 1960s, right? With guest workers helping rebuild the continent after the war. And yeah, that's definitely part of the story, but it's like chapter 10, not chapter 1. The real beginning is way, way bigger.
That's right, 1,300 years. And no, that is not a typo. We're talking about a presence that is older than many European nations themselves. So you see, Islam isn't some recent addition to European history, it's a fundamental part of European history.
So how in the world does a 1,300-year history even happen? Well, it wasn't just one single event. It actually happened in 3 completely distinct waves, each coming from a different direction and each leaving its own unique legacy on the continent.
Now, what's so fascinating about this is that these were not connected events. I mean, think about it. You've got Islam arriving in Spain from North Africa way back in 711. Then, centuries later, totally separate histories are unfolding over in the East with the Golden Horde, and then in the Balkans with the Ottomans. These are the ancient roots of Europe's first Muslim communities.
So that first wave, it all started in 711. It established what was known as Al-Andalus in modern-day Spain and Portugal. And for nearly 800 years, it wasn't just a political state. Its capital, Córdoba, became one of the greatest cities on earth, a shining beacon of science, philosophy, and culture, all at a time when much of Europe was still in the so-called Dark Ages. Okay, so while Al-Andalus was flourishing in the West, completely independent stories were kicking off in the East. You had the Mongol Golden Horde, which led to the rise of Muslim communities like the Tartars in Eastern Europe, and at the same time, the Ottoman Empire was expanding deep into the Balkans, which is how you get the indigenous Muslim populations in places like Bosnia and Albania that are still there to this day.
So that's the deep, deep history. Now let's hit the fast forward button and jump to today. What does this long, incredibly complex past actually mean for the demographics of modern Europe?
Well, the raw number is pretty staggering, 44 million people, and that was back in 2010. But honestly, that number is almost misleading because it just lumps everybody together. The reality is, this huge population is split into 2 very distinct groups, each with a completely different story.
And this right here is probably the single most important distinction to get. On one side, you have indigenous European Muslims, think Bosniaks, Albanians, whose families have been on the continent for hundreds and hundreds of years. On the other side, you've got communities that arrived much more recently, either through post-colonial ties or the big labor migrations after World War II. It's the same faith, sure, but entirely different historical journeys.
This data from 2016 really shows you that diversity in action. I mean, look at Kosovo, a direct legacy of the Ottoman era, where the population is over 90% Muslim. Then you've got Bulgaria, with a significant long-standing minority. And then you see Western European nations like France, where that large Muslim population is mostly a result of more recent history.
So you take all this history, all this diversity, and it creates a really complex reality on the ground today. And it's a reality that's full of vibrant cultural exchange, yeah, but also some serious societal debates and tensions that you see in the headlines all the time.
And across Europe, it seems like the same flashpoints pop up again and again. You have the intense debate over Islamic dress, which gets into big questions about religious freedom in public life. You have the documented, very real rise of Islamophobia. And then you have this fundamental tension between a belief in sacred religious law and the supremacy of secular civil law. And let's be clear, there is no single European view on any of this. Just look at this 2019 data. In Slovakia, a staggering 77% of people had an unfavorable view of Muslims. But in the UK, that number was just 18%. That is a massive gap, and it just shows how differently this whole conversation is experienced from one country to the next.
The conversation is also complicated by views coming from within some Muslim communities. For instance, a major study back in 2013 found that 75% of the European Muslims they surveyed believed there was only one correct interpretation of the Quran. Now, that kind of fundamentalist view, where religious law is often seen as more important than civil law, creates a really profound challenge for integration inside of secular European societies.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, if there's one thing that's crystal clear, it's that there are no simple answers here. There are no easy narratives.
Really, the single most important thing to take away is this. There is no one story. To even begin to understand Islam in Europe, you have to see all the pieces. The 1,300-year history, the huge difference between an Albanian Muslim and a British Pakistani Muslim, and the very real societal challenges that exist today. The story of Islam in Europe is a mosaic, not a monolith.
And so we're left with this big question. The outcome here isn't just about politics or some population chart. It's about the future of European identity itself. This 1,300-year-old story is far from over, and the next chapter is being written right now, as we speak.